Hello guys, and welcome to another video. Whoa, wait a minute, I hear you say. White cotton gloves? What's going on? This must be something quite special. Well, it is indeed. Today we're going to look at the Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso Gran Chronograph Retrograde. Let's scoot in and take a closer look. Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin and Audemars Piguet. If I said those names, what do they mean to you? Of course, it is what's referred to as the Holy Trinity or the Big Three. What do they all have in common? Other than, of course, they're considered the Big Three of Swiss watchmaking, all three of them have used movements supplied by Jaeger LeCoultre. And this, among many other reasons, is the reason why Jaeger LeCoultre is referred to as the watchmaker's watchmaker. Jaeger LeCoultre is a brand I admire greatly. While the majority of us are no doubt familiar with the story of the origins of the Reverso, for those who aren't, let's have a brief recap. There are two reasons for that. With a review of such an iconic timepiece, I believe it's deserving of a bit of an injection of the history of the watch. And additionally, at the time of filming this, it's 2021, which means it's the 30th anniversary of the creation of this. In British India, in early 1930, a Swiss businessman and watch collector by the name of César Dutré was challenged to create a watch capable of withstanding a game of polo by a group of British Army officers, one of whom had just had his watch face shatter during a match. Bearing in mind, of course, back then, watch glasses were very, very fragile. We didn't have the mineral glass or the sapphire glass that we have nowadays. Tasked with this, César Dutré contacted his friend Jacques-David LeCoultre, owner of LeCoultre, who would provide the movements. LeCoultre chose the French firm Jaeger SA to create the reversible case mechanism for the watch. With help from the commissioned French designer René Alfred Chauveau, the inventor of the slide and flip mechanism and owner of the patent. It would be a few years more before the two separate companies then became Jaeger LeCoultre as we know them today, that happening in 1937. The Reverso was initially patented as a wristwatch which can slide on its base and flip over on itself, and the original case was 38mm in length, 24mm in width, and 6mm thick, which, as you can see, is thinner than the case that I'm showing you today. The name Reverso is Latin for I turn around. With its angular lugs and its three horizontal lines both above and below the dial, the watch is immediately recognisable as an Art Deco masterpiece and was designed at the time to be both smart enough to be worn by the officers with their dress uniforms, but tough enough to withstand the rigours of a game of polo and daily use. And so was born the world's first sports wristwatch. One of the Reverso's more understated features, although not intentional at the time, was the blank steel case back, which made an ideal canvas for engravings. In 1936, for example, King Edward VIII had the royal crest engraved on his, shortly before abdicating the throne that same year. And aviatrix Amelia Earhart's Reverso featured a map of Mexico to New York with her flight path engraved on it. And let's just take a look at some of the relevant dates in the Reverso's history. So 1931 was of course the creation of the first Reverso model, the world's first sports watch. Surprisingly, these early watches did not feature an in-house LeCoultre movement because there wasn't a movement that was suitable for the case at the time. The first one was actually seen in 1933, the JLC 11U caliber, which was a 15 jewel manually wound movement with a 50-hour power reserve which vibrated at 18,000 vibrations per hour. In 1943, the Reverso is retired from the JLC collection following the war and subsequent economic decline. Style switches to round watches, and the late 60s, early 70s marked the Japanese quartz revolution, and this, of course, led to the decline of many mechanical watch factories. In 1972, Jaeger LeCoultre's Italian distributor discovers a hoard of unused Reverso cases and requests that the company restart production of the Reverso line. As a result of this, in 1982, the Reverso was relaunched and, as you're probably aware, is still going strong today, with so many models, too numerous to discuss in this one video. So let's get a little bit more up close and personal and take a good look at the watch. As you can see, we have a silver dial on the front of the watch. To the right of this are your chronograph push pieces and the winding and time setting crown. We have a silver guilloche dial with a waffle type pattern in the center. The sweep seconds with a red triangle tip and sword type hands, which are loom filled. We've got the seconds track on the inner portion, the Jaeger LeCoultre logo at 12. The index markers, and then a 3 and a 9. And then where the 6 would be is the date window. And then down in the bottom corner we have this little marker piece with the word arrête, as you can see. When you start the chronograph, you press the start button, this flicks over and exposes the word marché, which is in red, to contrast with arrête, which is in black. And this shows whether the chronograph is running or stopped, because obviously, because the chronograph is not on the front of the dial, you cannot visibly see this. So, as per all Reverso models, you flip, slide and clip the movement down, and on the reverse is the chronograph movement. We have the same style, the guilloche pattern with the same patterning, but this within a circle rather than a square. So we have a complete large circle for the seconds counter with the same kind of layout for the hand as the sweep seconds on the main dial, and then a sword hand indicating the minutes on this half round retrograde dial at the bottom. And both the seconds and minute marker are highlighted with a black ring and white numbers, and the legend at the bottom, Chronograph Retrograde, as you can see, and Swiss made. So starting, as you can see, allows the seconds hand to proceed as you would get with any normal chronograph movement. The minute counter, you'll notice, hopefully as that proceeds, is a continuously driven minute counter. It's not one which flicks over 1 minute at a time with each rotation of the seconds hand. It is constant mesh, and it is constantly driven throughout the entire counting procedure. And, as the name suggests, it is a retrograde counter. So once this reaches the 30 and the seconds reaches the 60 point, this minute counter hand snaps straight back to the 0 point and begins to count all over again after 30 minutes. And then with a stop and a press of the reset pusher, this jumps straight back to 0. Now, unlike every single other video on YouTube that shows this watch, I'm actually going to show you that retrograde function in action, because I have to say, prior to getting this, that drove me mad. And we all know what a retrograde function is. We all know what a retrograde function will do. However, we want to see it when we look at a video. Of course we do. And the fact that none of the other videos actually demonstrated this was incredibly frustrating. So right here, I'm going to show you that in action. First of all, on some speeded up footage showing the counter going quickly. And there it went. Wait, what? Sorry, that was too quick for you. Okay, let me show you that again in real time. And there it went. What? That was still too quick? Okay, here it is at 240 frames per second. And as you can see, it still flicks back from 30 to 0 so quickly that you can only just see the motion at 240 frames per second. It's really quite remarkable. And it happens so snappily but so smoothly. It's a joy to watch. It really, really is. And I confess to having done this several times during the filming of this, prior to the filming of this, and after the filming of this, because it is such a pleasure to watch this in action. Flipping the movement back over, you can see the beautiful engine turning on the back plate, and of course the ball bearing mechanism which locks this in place nice and securely, as you can see. The bracelet is a stainless steel engineer style bracelet. I think it puts me in mind of sort of brickwork rather than your typical engineer style bracelet, which tends to have raised links. And you can see that the outer links are polished and the inner links are brushed. The clasp is a work of art in itself and has the Jaeger LeCoultre logo and is a double deployment or double deployant clasp, whichever you prefer. Either one of those is actually a correct term, despite what some may say. And again, as you can see, the other side of the bracelet continues in the same tradition with polished outer links, brushed steel inner links. You then have the Jaeger LeCoultre name and the Reverso branding on the case back, and these, as you can see, are actually curved to fit the wrist of the wearer, like so. This particular watch has a movement which beats at 28,800 vibrations per hour, a high beat movement, which is pretty much the standard in high-level Swiss timepieces nowadays. And the chronograph is a horizontal clutch column wheel chronograph, which is very cleverly designed in its own right, because were it to rotate in the manner of a conventional chronograph, it would of course go in the wrong direction, and it would rotate counterclockwise on the back of the dial, and the same for the minute counter. So this movement was designed specifically for this watch and for this case, so that it would operate in the same direction as a conventional chronograph would on the front of a chronograph dial. The movement used in this particular watch is the caliber 859, which is based on the caliber 829, which was created specifically for the limited production run of the Chronograph Retrograde, which was only available in pink gold and in limited numbers, and still sells for a very high price today. The general layout is the same. It's a manual wind movement beating at 28,800 vibrations per hour. And the layout with the chronograph on the reverse is the same, with the exception of the limited run with the 829 caliber actually had the dials fitted as part of the bridges so that the movement is partially skeletonized and is an absolute joy to look at. The design of that particular movement is attributed to Manuel Gran and took 3 years in development. Essentially, as it's a fitted movement, it's a square movement in a square case, and this is very, very unusual for chronograph movements in general, but the entire movement had to be made from the ground up, including the time side, and essentially the biggest problems were cramming in around 317 parts into a movement case designed to hold about 200. Because they were working with preset dimensions for the case and had to fit in the complication as necessary. And Philippe Vandel actually said that the development process of the chronograph caliber was actually the most grueling and even more arduous than that of the 1993 tourbillon of the same series. Generally speaking, when a chronograph is placed in a square case, it's typically a round movement in a specially made holder inside of a square case, and it's highly unusual to actually have a square movement running a chronograph complication. And as a final point, not only did they have to develop the movement from scratch and design it in such a manner that the chronograph could run on the reverse dial and in the correct orientation, but they additionally had to design in the retrograde feature, which had to be precise. It had to count minutes exactly and return back to the zero precisely at the 30-minute count, which is no mean feat for a watch of this size, as I'm sure you can imagine. The more I look at this watch and the more I think about the work and effort that went into creating the movement that fits inside this small, slim and elegant case, the more it impresses me, and it really truly is a joy to behold. This is one of those watches where you can quite often look at your wrist to see the time and completely lose yourself in looking at the watch and forget to check the time, and then have to recheck it again a couple of seconds later because you noticed that you didn't actually read the time on it, you were just too busy admiring it. And being a chronograph, of course, I love chronographs. They are my absolute favourite complication, my favourite mechanical movement, and upon learning that Jaeger LeCoultre made a couple of chronographs, I knew that for all the length of time I've wanted a Reverso, once I learned that they made a Reverso chronograph, I really knew that I wanted one of these. So while this is far short of being considered the rarest or most desirable of the Reverso watches and complications, this is my perfect choice of all of the Reverso watches. The second only to this would be the Squadra Chronograph, which is a chunkier, squarer case, uses a high beat mechanical automatic movement, but is a conventional chronograph with the running seconds and minute counter on the front, with subdials to the 3 and the 9 accordingly, and a GMT dial at the 6 o'clock position. It's very nice in its own way, but it's nothing like as elegant. It's much more rugged and sports orientated than this, which to me is incredibly elegant. So this, for me, is the perfect Reverso. This is everything I would want in a Reverso, the simple elegance of a timekeeper with the added complication of this beautiful chronograph dial on the rear. Now, if it isn't clear at this point that I am something of a fan of Jaeger LeCoultre in terms of being very, very impressed by them as a watchmaker, I am indeed a fan of Jaeger LeCoultre, and there are several reasons for this. It's not just because I love the design of the Reverso, which I do. It is such a unique and fascinating design to me, but that Jaeger LeCoultre as a watchmaker impressed me more so than any other because of so many things that they have done over the years. There's the invention, for example, of the millionometer, the first mechanical device to create gears which could measure a micron. It was an incredibly accurate machine. Although there was some protection for inventions at the time, in Switzerland there wasn't an extended patent system until the adoption of a federal patent law in 1888. And for this reason, the construction of the millionometer remained an exclusive secret of the company for more than 50 years. Because had that been publicly available, of course, it would have been used everywhere without LeCoultre being able to claim copyright rights to that. In 1847, LeCoultre brought about a huge innovation for the industry when he introduced a crown winding system with a double function, which was winding the watch and setting the time. Now, of course, in this day and age, that's standard. That's par for the course. We're used to winding a watch with a crown and pulling the stem out and setting the time. That's pretty normal. But of course, back in the 1800s, it wasn't the case. You would have a key. You would carry a key separate to your pocket watch. You would open the case back and you would wind the movement. You would wind the mainspring barrel with a key. Similarly, you would open the case front and you would set the time with a key also. So LeCoultre were the first people to actually integrate this system into a keyless system, whereby you would wind the crown and then you would push a pin, so like a pin set lever design. You would push a pin to engage a lever to allow you to set the time via the crown. Since the invention was not patented, other watchmakers, of course, quickly implemented this system, which made the traditional winding key obsolete because, as you can imagine, it's the kind of thing that would be easily lost or misplaced. And this became a standard system, and it is still adopted today by pretty much every manufacturer of watch movements. Jaeger LeCoultre has created more than 1,200 movement calibers since its founding in the 1800s, and that is something else. That's quite incredible. Further to this, they have held the record, and still do to this day, for the world's smallest mechanical movement since 1929, the caliber 101, which measures 14 millimeters by 4.8 millimeters by 3.4 millimeters. Now that is incredibly tiny, and it's difficult to visualize with just numbers in your head. So here is a photograph of the movement next to the head of a match. And here you can see it in a bracelet which was gifted to Queen Elizabeth II on her coronation. Now, were it not for the fact that there is plainly visible a watch face, you would be forgiven for believing that this actually housed a mechanical movement. And then just for a little bit of further comparison, here's another picture of the movement inside a Reverso case, just to give you some idea. And when you compare it to this Reverso case, for example, you can see that this is still a relatively compact watch case especially compared to modern watch movements. Let's talk about the thinnest watch movement. Although Jaeger LeCoultre do not hold the record for the thinnest watch movement today, which is held by Piaget with the Altiplano 2, which is an incredible achievement in its own right at 2 millimeters thick. for the entire watch, I'll add. Not just the movement, the entire watch is 2mm thick, which is remarkable. The caliber 145 did actually set the record in 1907 for the world's thinnest movement. Bear in mind this was 1907, and the caliber 145 was 1.38mm thick. And again, to put that into perspective, here's a picture of the movement as you would view it from the top of the movement. And here is a picture of one of the pocket watches that actually housed this movement. Of course, as I said, it's not the thinnest in today's circles, but that is still some remarkable achievement. Less than 2mm thick for a watch movement in 1907. Frankly, if you're not impressed with that, then I have to say very, very little will impress you. So that about wraps up this whole review, and I sincerely hope that you've enjoyed watching this as much as I've enjoyed talking about it, and as much as I've enjoyed looking at this beautiful, beautiful watch. And of course, that being the end of the review, there is only one thing left to do. I've always wanted to do that every time I watch a video where somebody wears white cotton gloves. So, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed watching this. I have most certainly enjoyed filming this. If you did enjoy this video, please hit the thumbs up button and feel free to leave a comment, ask a question. I always try to respond to my comments, and both of those actions really help the channel tremendously, and I really would appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Bye for now.